Hi. Okay, so welcome to Pandemic Intimacies, how gay and bisexual men are using their smartphones to negotiate their cultures of intimacy. My name is Jamie Haykim, and I'll be presenting or co-presenting with my colleague James Cummings. We are from the ESRC-funded project Digital Intimacies, how gay and bisexual men use their smartphones to negotiate their cultures of intimacy. The project aims to move beyond a user platform approach to digital media use and instead situate gay and bisexual smartphone mediated intimacies within the social and cultural conditions in which they occur. Today, we'll be talking about how UK-based gay and bisexual men have used their smartphones to negotiate their cultures of intimacy during the coronavirus pandemic. First, some quick definitions. The definition of intimacy we are using is Lauren Ballant's Connections We Depend on for Living. We use this for its deliberate capaciousness beyond the hetero-homonormative ideals that underpin mainstream understandings of intimacy: couple-based, long-term, and romantic. As you'll see, our participants' practices of intimacy move beyond these norms and, in line with previous scholarship on gay men's cultures of intimacy, were defined by a blurring of the normative boundaries between friendship, romance, and casual sex, the greater, though contested, significance of casual sex and non-monogamy, a greater dependence on counterpublic spaces where these cultures of intimacy are practiced, so in short, gay scenes and the digital infrastructures of intimacy, such as hookup apps and other digital platforms. Understanding intimacy as connections we depend on for living allows us to apprehend both the different norms and practices that shape gay and bi men's cultures of intimacy, and also their capacities to, in the Deleuzean tradition upon which Ballant partially draws, sustain life. So ultimately, what we're asking in this short presentation is, how are gay and bisexual men using their smartphones to negotiate their cultures of intimacy during the pandemic? And how do these negotiations help to sustain these men's lives?
Okay, so in the UK, a national lockdown began on the 23rd of March 2020 and has since gone through different periods of relaxation and restriction. At its most severe, lockdown prohibited in-person meetings with anyone outside of one's own household. When it came to the question of how gay and bi men should navigate their sex lives during the different phases of the pandemic and lockdown, the advice that they have received has been contradictory. On the one hand, until August 2020, the UK's leading sexual health organisation, the Terence Higgins Trust, was recommending abstinence from sex in person. On the other hand, organisations like Prepster developed advice on having sex while reducing one's risk of contracting coronavirus. Across organisations, digitally mediated sex has been advocated in lieu of in-person interaction. So if these were the parameters that informed the common sense on what intimacies were practicable between gay and bi men during lockdown, the picture that our participants have painted of their actual intimate practices and how these did or did not sustain their lives is complex. The fervour for digitally mediated sex and social interaction was shared by some of our participants, such as Luca, who described his smartphone as a sort of medication for the whole situation, something that enables us to manage our relationships and prevents the outbreak of chaos on the streets. However, this enthusiasm for digitally mediated intimacies was far from universal. There was a shared sense that video sex, WhatsApp groups, and Zoom calls, amongst other forms of digital intimacy, could sustain the connections that these men depended on for living in the short term, but that these could not replace in-person intimacies, to which there was a longing to return. For Michael, who several times had had video sex with men over Facebook, these experiences were not a substitute for the real thing. And despite the various technologies at his disposal, he felt subject to huge restrictions in terms of his ability to experience social and sexual intimacies. Other participants discussed their longings for physical touch. This was understood to be deeply meaningful in ways that could not be replicated in digital settings. Tony reflected on the meanings of physical contact between his friends, for whom hugging was a ritualized practice of intimacy that conferred connection and inclusion. While he acknowledged that seeing someone's face on a Zoom call could engender more powerful forms of intimacy than text-based communication alone, he lamented that it does not give you that hug, that close contact, that feeling of connection that a hug does.
Another significant way that digital media have intervened in gay bi men's cultures of intimacy during the pandemic is in the creative ways they have been used to remediate the counterpublic spaces where these men ordinarily negotiate key aspects of their intimate lives. And there are different examples of this. For instance, London gay sex club promoter, Jamie HP, has moved all of his previously live events onto Zoom, charging customers for links to Zoom meetings where gay men and bi men sexually perform in front of each other. Another example is Queer Club Night, Queer House Party, which was started the first Friday of lockdown. Queer House Party describes itself as a DJ collective and award-winning virtual queer party that's accessible, interactive, camp, radical, DIY, and punk AF. It has live-streamed DJ sets and queer performances every week since lockdown began in March. None of our participants have so far talked about attending events like this. In fact, the picture here is much less complex than their discussions of the interpersonal intimacies, with the overwhelming trend showing a very tangible sense of loss and not being able to mix in these publicly accessible physical spaces that have been so instrumental to multiple forms of gay and bi male sociability. For instance, Daniel says, "You don't have the intimacy of a night out. I miss being in a club with queer people, and I feel bad for 18 and 19-year-olds who are coming out of school, coming out and everything, because I think that physical space is so important. It's so affirming to be in a room of gay people, or, to go out and just meet people, or kiss people, or flirt with people. I feel that was really formative. I'd been to gay clubs long before I downloaded Tinder." So whilst the ingenuity with which some club promoters are using digital media to remediate the communal infrastructures of gay life during the pandemic, the gay and bi men we have so far spoken to are talking in quite affecting terms about how this lack of physical space has diminished their lives during the pandemic.
So to conclude, as a result of the pandemic, there is a significant asymmetry between the communal and technological infrastructures, to use Kane Race's formulation, of gay and bi men's lives. While there has been remarkable inventiveness in the use of smartphones and other devices to remediate different aspects of gay and bi men's cultures of intimacy, amongst our interviewees, there is a complex picture, but one that suggests a general trend towards a diminished sense of living. There's a lot to unpack here, but given the time restrictions, we'll end with just some key insights in relation to the sexual health advice that was published at the beginning of the pandemic. Entirely replacing physical intimacy with digital intimacy is not practicable, especially for a social group whose lives have for a long time been dependent on the digital and the physical being entangled in specific ways. Abstinence, as opposed to harm reduction, was poor sexual health advice that did not acknowledge this, and would only have further diminished the lives of those who would have followed it during a moment when the pandemic continues to make it difficult for all of us, not just gay and bi men, to sustain our lives in affectively meaningful ways. Thank you.
Thank you.